We are hearing directly from Republican presidential candidates Ted Cruz and John Kasich for the first time on their coordinated effort to block Donald Trump from becoming the party's nominee. We head straight to RTV6 State House reporter Katie Hines for details on what both candidates are saying this midday. Katie.
Mark, both Republicans say the goal is to prevent Donald Trump from winning the 1,237 delegates, thereby paving the way for a contested convention. Kasich and Cruz say they want to ensure the nominee is someone who can unify the party and win in November, and they don't think that person is Donald Trump. The Cruz and Kasich campaigns announced the move last night. Cruz's campaign saying he will focus his efforts here on Indiana, and Kasich's campaign announcing he's suspending efforts here and focusing his time and resources in Oregon and New Mexico, where he's been performing well. Here's what Cruz told reporters in Clark County in the last hour.
It is big news today that John Kasich has decided to pull out of Indiana to give us a head-to-head contest with Donald Trump. That is good for the men and women of Indiana. It's good for the country to have a clear and direct choice.
And the vice chair of Donald Trump's Indiana campaign releasing a statement on the move, saying in part, Cruz, Kasich, and the rest of the Stop Trump extremists are trying to turn the democratic process into a bad board game. The American people are rejecting this underhanded political gamesmanship, and Hoosiers will reject it as well. Cruz is making 3 more campaign stops in Indiana today. He's scheduled to meet with supporters in Bartholomew and Johnson counties. His next stop is scheduled for 2 p.m. in Columbus. We'll be there. We'll be following him on the campaign trail and have live reports beginning this afternoon. Mark.
All right, Katie, and this midday, we're getting a new reaction from John Kasich on skipping Indiana. Kasich is campaigning today in Pennsylvania ahead of tomorrow's primary there. He's telling reporters that he still wants his supporters in Indiana to vote for him and that the GOP is likely headed to a contested convention.
If you can't get the right number of delegates, you don't win. And then the delegates who are selected through a democratic process get to choose. What's wrong with that?
But Governor, doesn't undercut your whole strategy if you're not asking your voters to vote for Cruz in Indiana?
I'm not campaigning in Indiana, and he's not campaigning in these other states. That's all. That's all it is.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Governor.
It's not a big deal.
Enjoy the
Our political insiders at RTV6 are calling it a political maneuver that planned to keep Donald Trump from winning delegates in Indiana and those in several other western states. Political insider Abdul Hakim Shabazz visited our studios during Good Morning Indiana, and he told me that he's never seen this happen during a presidential election, but can see the logic behind the move.
Makes sense, because remember, in a campaign you have very limited resources. So if John Kasich is coming in third in Indiana and Ted Cruz is very competitive here, then let Ted Cruz take Indiana. Meanwhile, in exchange for that, Kasich goes to work out in New Mexico, out in Oregon, where they have about 54 delegates, which is almost the same as they have here in Indiana.
When that news came in, Trump blasted both on Twitter. He posted this tweet saying, quote, "Wow, just announced that Lion, Ted, and Kasich are going to collude in order to keep me from getting the Republican nomination. Desperation," end quote.
You got to remember, in all the polls that have been out, Donald Trump is really only about 41%. That means 60% of Republicans want somebody else. The problem has always been that field has always been crowded and divided. So the logic is, at least from Mr. Kasich and Mr. Cruz's perspective, is, hey, if one of us steps out, the other one has a much better chance of maybe capturing a good chunk of that 60% vote.
Abdul went on to tell us that he can't remember another presidential race in recent memory where a team-up like this happened. He says, quote, "All bets are off. Anything can happen. It still can, and it probably will," end quote. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton campaigns in Iowa tomorrow. It'll be her, Indiana tomorrow. It'll be her first stop in the state during her run for president. There is no word yet on where she'll make that stop, and as of right now, there are no set plans yet for Bernie Sanders to campaign in Indiana. Taking a look now at the updated numbers on early voting in our state, the Secretary of State's office reports more than 110,000 votes have been cast in early voting statewide, with more than 64,000 of those as Republican ballots. And remember, as we approach May 3rd, Indianapolis this week is your place for Democracy 2016 coverage and for the race for the White House. You can see it Sunday morning at 8:30 right here on RTV6 and on the RTV6 app.